first, let me thank you for this opportunity. It's truly an honor to be at this institution and at a very interesting time. The world's attention in the next few days will be on Vilnius, and I think not as much for what will be happening here, but maybe more so for what will not be happening in Vilnius, because the main highlight of the European summit this year was the signing, or still is, of association agreement with some of the Eastern European Partnership states, namely Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Armenia. The anticipation was that Ukraine will sign the final agreement. Armenia, Georgia, and Moldova will initial, with the expectation that they sign sometime next year, because the negotiations have already been completed. But as for this moment, we know that Ukraine will not sign. Armenia will not initial. Moldova, although some say they're still hesitating, but they will initial. Georgia is the only one seems to have firmly announced that they will definitely initial the agreement. So it still will be one of the major highlights of the summit, but in a truncated manner. So the question now everybody is asking, why this has happened, since there was no indication until last month that Ukraine and Armenia will backtrack. So what really happened that led to the decision of Ukraine and Armenia to not sign the association agreement? Of course, I cannot speak for Ukraine. I can't even speak for my own government, because I'm not a member of government. I used to be, but I'm not. And whoever tries to explain what really happened these past few months or at the last minute will only be speculation. The only true answer to this question can be given by those who took that decision. And I'm happy that the President of Armenia and Ukraine, they will attend the summit. Probably they will have opportunity to speak. And I hope they will elaborate, partly, albeit, on that decision. But for the rest of us, whatever we hear are clearly speculations, based on, of course, some educated geopolitical considerations. Speculations range from pressure to coercion to free will decision, and also bad judgment. So which one it is, difficult to tell. I personally will refrain from any speculation, but I can give you my own preference. What would have been my own choice if I was in a position of leadership and in a position of making decision with regard to the choices available before Armenia? On one hand, the association agreement with the European Union, on the other hand, the custom union, and maybe future membership in Eurasia Union. If I was in a position of decision-making and I was between those two choices, what would have been my preference? In my view, for a country like Armenia, as small in size and population and geographically in a very difficult position, at this stage of independence, we should have refrained from joining any arrangement, union, which will limit our ability to make our own decisions on any issue, whether it's economic, political, security. Joining the custom union would mean that you are relinquishing your decision-making ability with regard to the customs matter. That means you're diminishing your sovereignty. That clearly affects the sovereignty in terms of decisions on those issues of those countries who will join the customs union. Well, you may say, then most of the members of the European Union have relinquished their sovereignty not only on custom matters and great many matters. Clearly, they made that decision on their own will. That's why I said for countries like Armenia, at this stage of our independence, in my view, it's a mistake to relinquish any leverage on decision-making, to limit our possibilities, to limit our options, considering our geopolitical situation. Particularly that joining the customs union clearly contradicts and rules out joining any arrangement in free trade and other economic associations with the European Union, a direction that Armenia has clearly adopted from day one of its independence as one of its directional choices. So joining customs union limits our options, but signing association agreement leaves every other possibility, including having free trade agreement, which we already have within CIS with Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others, pretty much open. So signing association agreement does not exclude any possibility, but joining the customs union excludes our options and possibilities with regard to our engagement with the European Union. My belief from day one, as we were talking and negotiating with the European Union, and Armenia, by the way, was way ahead of the pact in terms of making advances in its negotiations as far as the chapters were concerned. I was hoping that our decision was firm, definite, and Armenia will sign the association agreement. Having been Minister of Foreign Affairs and having been dealt with these kind of issues, in my time it was more security matters. As we were a member of collective security agreement with Russia, we also managed to elevate our security arrangement with NATO to its highest possible level. Partnership for Peace agreement we signed while we were a member of the collective security agreement. So the policy of complementarity that Armenia had adopted enabled us to be able to complement the different security options that were available for Armenia. And we succeeded in doing so. Had we continued with the policy of complementarity, today we would have had the strong argument with both sides to say that Armenia cannot join one thing that will exclude the other, because at the core of our foreign policy principle is the notion of complementarity. We can only engage ourselves in two directions in a way that one will not be exclusive of the other. And that option, as far as I'm concerned, and having been there as foreign minister, was available to us. So somewhere down the road, a wrong decision or a misstep had occurred that led to a situation where the leadership of Armenia, the president in particular, has found himself in a position that he couldn't maneuver between the two and had to accept the one choice, and that was the northern Russian choice. The next question we need to ask, what this means, why it happened, I tried to explain. There's no definitive answer. I hope we will eventually know. But what this means needs to be articulated on three different levels. One is the global level. What this means at the global level. Is this choice that Ukraine, Armenia were put before is the beginning of a bigger geopolitical contest between Russia and West? Are the old habits of Cold War re-emerging so that the different poles in the political system will re-establish themselves in the form and style of the past? I personally don't think that this is the case, because we have been in similar situations. When former Soviet republics attempted to join NATO, there was similar wave of resistance from Russia, but that had been overcome. And it's interesting that we're having this debate and discussion in a Baltic state, which made a decision both on NATO and European Union, and successfully so, overcoming all sorts of obstacles and resistances that was coming from their neighbor. So in my view, this is not a resurgence in any way of the Cold War mentality or an attempt to revive that geopolitical system. This is simply, for now, it's more positioning contest between East and West. And we are the victims of that competition rather than the geopolitical contest that could have clearly longer-term negative consequences on global politics and also on different regions, including our own, the Caucasus. So at the global level, very much will depend as what next steps will be, what kind of relationship will be established between Russia and the European Union, what the future relationship will be between Russia and the United States. So in that triangulation, whatever happens will pretty much determine whether what we're witnessing today will eventually be the beginning of something bigger that will be reminiscent of the past. As I said, I very much doubt, and I also hope that I'm right on this, but again, one never knows. I think in 1945, after World War II, when the two polars, the two camps were established, then clearly the geopolitical situation and the emerging situation was such that at that time the creation of two camps, East and West, were the prerogatives of today. But today, in this more open system, in the age of internet and fast communications, the environment, the circumstances are so different that at this stage, I personally don't see that the old methods and old system can be in any way revived that will lead to the kind of confrontation that we've seen before the end of Cold War. What this means regionally, my concern is more the regional consequences of the arrangements that are being evolved right here in Vilnius as a result of signing or non-signing of association agreement. Let me give you just the example of Georgia and Armenia. In our case, our relationship for the stability of the region is extremely critical. Armenia has antagonistic, to say the least, relationship with its eastern and western neighbors, Turkey and Azerbaijan. And both of those countries attempt to create an arc of isolation around Armenia. And Georgia is the prime candidate to complete that arc around Armenia so that we'll be limited in our access to Black Sea, to Russia, and to Europe. Partly, they've succeeded in terms of engaging Georgia economically on oil and gas matters. But to Georgia's credit, they managed to somehow balance their economic interest with their geopolitical interest in terms of understanding the necessity of that link with Armenia as being critical for the stability of the region. But now that Georgia is clearly on the path of European integration, and Armenia has made the choice at this stage to join the northern camp, the custom union, the only remaining cement the only remaining link that still ties Georgia with Armenia, it seems like diminished. On every other issue, on security, they're more towards NATO. Armenia is a member of collective security. On ethnic conflicts, Georgia has two territorial issues, Abkhazia and South Ossetia. They're clearly on the side of territorial integrity principle. We Armenians have Karabakh, and we insist on self-determination. So we are on two different sides of the fence on this issue. In our relations with Russia, ours is a strategic partnership. Georgia's relationship with Russia, to say the least, is again not friendly. We have also some ethnic issues with the Armenian minority, cultural differences in terms of properties, and also religious matters in terms of church relations and church registrations. So on great many issues, Georgia and Armenia differ. The only common vision or the common path that was being highlighted in this past was the European integration. Now that we're beginning to differ on this issue, that truly concerns me that eventually the pressure from East and West will lead Georgia more on their side because of the absence of any common bond between our two countries. So this is an issue that both Georgians and Armenians need to focus on so that we will not in any way create a situation where one or the other will be forced to be more assertive in its engagement so that that link will not be jeopardized. And third level, as what this means, of course, concerns Armenia, its population, its future, its democracy, and its politics. If the choice between Europe and custom union was also a choice of value, then clearly we need to be concerned about this. But I prefer not to make this a choice of value. I will make this, at this moment, a choice of market, a choice of economics, or maybe a security choice, an acquiescence with the demands of a stronger power for its own interest to comply so that we maintain our relationship. This is the choice that I will still think that we made. If the choice was between European values in terms of democracy, rule of law, and the absence of it, then we must truly be concerned in Armenia with regard to our own future. In this past 20 years, clearly we made major headways in democracy and rule of law. Of course, we're not yet the God-given gift of democracy. We've never held a clean election yet, but minimum personal rights, human rights are being respected. People are free to express themselves with certain limitations. And some democratic roots have been now implanted. We clearly don't want to lose this. Just the opposite, we want to build on it. So whether this was a choice of value, we will know in the coming weeks and months. Maybe next year, as political processes unfold, we will have local elections, then parliamentary, then presidential. There's a constitutional committee formed to amend our constitution. We don't know what's there, what kind of changes will be proposed by the government. Will those choices in any way hint us that this custom union decision was deeper than simple economic interest? These all eventually will come to surface. But my fear and concern is that they could be very late. We gotta stop it now if that is the choice. That's where comes the third question. what needs to be done, what kind of relationship now Armenia needs to construct with the European Union, given all what I've just presented. Armenian people had made a clear choice at the earlier stages of our independence with regard to our strategic direction, to our belonging. Caucasus being at the crossroads of different civilizations and being subjected throughout our history to the influences of different powers, different cultures, from the Persians to Arabs to Turks, then Russians. You can see and find the influence of all the layers of these civilizations today in Armenia's psyche and Armenia's thinking. So those are pretty much out there. Depending which one gets nurtured, eventually that is the one that will become more prevalent. The European direction and the European values, which are deeply seated way before the Persians, when Armenia adopted Christianity, which is very much reflective of today's European values, are deeply seated. And I don't think with one decision whether to join the custom union or the other association will change that, because that is what mostly counts, what has been historically embedded in us, what is by default or naturally comes from our soul and mind. And I think that is the Christian, democratic, Western values, and eventually that's what will prevail. But that requires nurturing, because sometimes the narrow political interest, the personal interest, a party interest could prevail and could oversee these more deep-seated and dormant values, and country be taken to a totally wrong direction. So at this very critical stage, the European Union needs to be cognizant that Armenia belongs to Europe, that the people of Armenia has made that decision earlier on, and in '93 we applied for Council of Europe membership, and we became member in 2001, and truly a lot of headway has been done. Now to reverse all that will be extremely detrimental. So the European Union should not drop the ball as far as Armenia is concerned for that one decision. And I'm pretty confident they will not. I personally been in contact with the leadership. Yesterday, Barroso put out a statement saying that European Union will continue its cooperation with Armenia, with Ukraine. The doors are open. Signing the association agreement will always be available. But even that is not signed, I think Europe and Armenia should reaffirm their commitment to deepen their democratic processes in case of Armenia, and in case of European Union, to be vigilant, to continue to have its supervisory role in seeing that these processes continue to evolve. So this summit, although could have been totally different and could have been for Armenia a beginning of a new road, has put us a little bit on the back seat, but clearly has not led us out of the car. The next steps will be critical, beginning right here in Vilnius from the statement that has to come from the Armenian side during the summit. I don't know if any document will be signed. There could be exchange of letters or that sort of thing. But whatever it is, I would like to see in those documents Armenia's commitments for democracy, rule of law are reaffirmed in no uncertain terms, so that no reversal will ever occur.